His mother pushed my gift onto the floor and asked if I'd bought it with coupons. The box hit the hardwood with a soft thud. Not loud enough to stop the laughter, just loud enough for me to remember it later. She didn't look down, she looked at me. "Girls like you marry rich," she said, smiling like it was a joke everyone knew. "You don't earn it." Someone chuckled. A fork clinked against a plate. His father's mouth tightened, but he didn't correct her. My fiancé Grant sat frozen for 1 second. Then he pushed his chair back. "Mom," he said, voice low. "That's enough." She blinked at him, surprised. Like she didn't expect her own son to have a boundary. I didn't pick the box up. I kept my hands in my lap. I looked at the table setting. The crystal glasses, the folded napkins, the heavy silverware that felt like it belonged to a different era. And I thought very clearly, they have no idea what I came here to give them. Now let me rewind. My name is Natalie. I live in New York City, but not the version people imagine. No penthouse, no designer closet. A clean 1-bedroom in Queens with a view of the elevated train. I take my coffee black. I wear the same 3 winter coats on rotation. I bring my lunch to work most days. Not because I can't afford to eat out, because I don't like wasting money on things that disappear in 10 minutes. Grant used to tease me about it, not cruelly, more like fascination. "You're the only person I know who packs grapes like they're a strategy," he once said. I smiled. They are. He never asked me what I made. Not once. And I never offered. Not because I was hiding. Because I wanted our relationship to stay simple. We met at a charity supply drive after a coastal storm. He was there with a group from his family's company organizing donations. I was there because one of our distribution partners had warehouses in the area. We spent an hour moving pallets and making jokes about the stale donuts. He had a calm confidence, polite, quick to help. He listened the way most people don't. When we started dating, I noticed his ease around money. The way he tipped without thinking. The way he spoke about travel like it was normal. His family had a manufacturing business in Pennsylvania. Not billionaire wealth, but the kind of stable, multi-generational comfort that comes with property connections and a name that opens doors. Still, Grant never acted superior. If anything, he was careful not to. When he proposed, it was quiet. Sunday morning, my kitchen. Bare feet on cold tile. A small ring box he'd hidden behind the cereal. He didn't make a speech. He just said, "I want to build a life with you." And I believed him. That's why the dinner mattered. Not because I needed his parents to approve, but because I knew how family can shape a marriage. Especially when money is part of the air they breathe. Grant warned me his mother could be sharp. "She's protective," he said the week before the trip. "Of you?" I asked. "Of the family," he said. I didn't push. I understood protectiveness. I grew up in a middle-class house in Ohio where every purchase was discussed, where my mom clipped coupons because it mattered, where my dad kept a folder labeled retirement even when there wasn't much inside. I learned early that money isn't just money, it's safety, it's identity, it's power. By the time I was 32, I was running operations for a mid-sized supply chain firm that sourced raw materials for manufacturers. It's not glamorous work. It's phone calls at odd hours, ports, freight delays, relationships. If you do it right, no one notices. If you do it wrong, everything stops. Over time, I got good. Very good. And the company grew. My compensation grew with it. $37,000 a month, give or take, depending on performance. It still feels strange to say out loud. Most months I don't. Grant's family didn't know any of that. They knew I worked in logistics. That's what Grant told them, not a lie. Just a small label for a very large reality. A month before the dinner, Grant mentioned something during a late-night walk. "My dad's been stressed," he said. "Supply issues," he added. "Some contracts are shaky." I asked a few questions, careful not to sound like I was interviewing him. He told me enough. Their company made specialized components. They relied on reliable materials. And lately prices were volatile. Lead times were unpredictable. Suppliers were tightening terms. I listened and a familiar part of my mind clicked on. Not ambition, responsibility. I cared about Grant. I also understood the world that was squeezing his family. So I spent the next 3 months doing what I do. Quietly. I called contacts. I ran numbers. I looked at alternative sourcing options. I drafted a partnership plan that could stabilize their materials flow and reduce their exposure. I didn't do it to impress them. I did it because that's what love looks like to me: preparation, consistency, reducing risk. I packaged it carefully: a proposal, a preliminary term sheet, a timeline for a phased pilot. It wasn't a contract signed in blood, it was an opportunity. A door they hadn't been brave enough to knock on. Because the supplier I could access was one they considered out of reach. I put everything in a simple, sturdy box. No ribbon, no gold foil, just a box. The kind that looks like nothing until you open it. The night before the dinner, Grant and I stayed at his parents' house. A large home in a quiet suburb. Tasteful. Family photos framed in heavy wood. A hallway lined with awards and newspaper clippings. Grant's mother, Elaine, hugged him first. Then turned to me. Her smile held for one beat too long. "Natalie," she said. "Welcome." She looked at my coat, my shoes, my hands, like she was reading a story I hadn't written. At dinner the next evening the table was full. Grant's father, Tom, Grant's younger brother, an aunt and uncle, 2 family friends from church. They talked about markets and real estate. Someone made a joke about kids these days not wanting to work. Elaine asked me where I was from. "Ohio," I said. "Ah," she replied. A small sound of dismissal. She asked where I lived. "Queens." Her eyebrows lifted. "Oh," she said. Then she smiled at the table like it was amusing. Grant reached for my knee under the table. A small squeeze. I kept my expression neutral. They asked what I did. "Supply chain," I said. Elaine laughed lightly. "Like Amazon boxes?" she asked. "Something like that," I replied. Grant's jaw tightened slightly. Then the dessert plates came. Grant stood and tapped his glass. He made a short toast about love and family. He thanked his parents. He looked at me with that steady warmth that made me say yes in my kitchen. Then he nodded toward me. "And Natalie brought something," he said. Elaine's eyes sharpened. I placed the box on the table. "This is for your family," I said. Elaine leaned in and gave a small laugh. "What is it?" she asked. "Did you buy that with coupons?" The table chuckled. I didn't laugh. Elaine lifted the edge of the box like it might be cheap. Then she pushed it. It slid, fell, hit the floor. And Elaine said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Girls like you marry rich. You don't earn it." Grant pushed his chair back. "Mom," he said, "that's enough." The room went still in a way that felt unfamiliar to them. Elaine blinked. Tom stared at his plate. I kept my hands in my lap. I looked at the box on the floor. Then I looked at Elaine. And I said calmly, "You're right about one thing." She tilted her head. "I do earn." Then I stood. And I walked away from the table. I didn't slam the door when I left. I just walked out. The night air outside Grant's parents' house was cool and quiet. Suburban quiet. The kind where every porch light glows softly and nothing dramatic ever seems to happen. My heels clicked against the driveway. Behind me, I heard the front door open. Natalie. Grant. I didn't turn immediately. I looked at the street first. At the identical lawns. At the parked SUVs. At a flag on someone's porch moving gently in the wind. Then I faced him. He had his jacket half on like he'd grabbed it without thinking. "I'm so sorry," he said. I nodded once. "I know." He stepped closer. I didn't expect that. "I did," I said. That made him pause. "What do you mean?" I folded my arms not defensively, just to keep my hands still. "Your mom was studying me the second I walked in," I said. He ran a hand through his hair. She's protective. That's one word. He didn't argue. Grant has always been honest that way. He looked past me at the car parked along the curb. You don't have to leave, he said quietly. I'm not staying for dessert, I replied. A small breath left his chest. Fair. We stood there a moment, two people who still loved each other but had just seen the world tilt slightly. I'm coming with you, he said. You don't have to. I want to. Inside the house, someone laughed again. The sound drifted out through the open door. Grant turned toward it briefly, then back to me. Give me 2 minutes. He went inside. I stayed in the driveway. Not angry, just steady. When he came back out, he had his keys. What did you say? I asked. That we were leaving. And that Mom owes you an apology. I watched his face carefully. Did she apologize? He shook his head. I didn't give her time. We drove to the hotel where we were staying. Neither of us talked much on the way. Streetlights passed across the windshield like slow pulses. Finally, Grant spoke. What was in the box? I looked out the window. You'll see, eventually, I said. He glanced at me. Eventually, yes. He nodded. He didn't press. That was one of the reasons I loved him. Back in the hotel room, I slipped off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed. Grant leaned against the desk. Are you okay? He asked. I will be. That wasn't fair. No, I agreed. He watched me carefully. Why didn't you pick it up? He asked. The box. I met his eyes. Because if I had bent down, I said softly, it would have confirmed her theory. He exhaled slowly. Grant understands systems. Business systems. Family systems. What he saw tonight was a system built on hierarchy. And I had refused to step into my assigned role. Mom thinks people date for status, he said. Most people do, I replied, but not you. I smiled faintly. You never asked what I make. He shrugged. That felt rude. Maybe I said, or maybe it meant you trusted me. He came and sat beside me. So tell me now. I shook my head. Not tonight. He accepted that. Grant has a patience that feels rare these days. Okay, he said. Tomorrow then. I lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. My mind wasn't replaying Elaine's words. It was replaying the moment the box hit the floor. The sound. The way no one reached for it. Not the aunt. Not the brother. Not even Tom. I wasn't angry. I was curious. Curious how long it would take them to realize what they'd pushed away. The next morning, we had breakfast at a small diner near the hotel. Grant barely touched his eggs. You're still thinking about it, he said. I am. You're not reconsidering us, are you? That question was careful, not defensive, just honest. I shook my head. This isn't about us. It feels like it could become about us. I leaned forward slightly. Grant. He looked up. I love you, I said. But marriage isn't just two people. He nodded. I know. And if your parents believe I'm marrying for money, I continued, that belief will show up again. He looked down at his coffee. You're right. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Finally, he said, I'll talk to them. You don't have to defend me. I want to. I watched the way his jaw set slightly. Grant wasn't a confrontational person, but he had a quiet line he didn't let people cross. That mattered. When we got back to the house later that morning to collect our bags, the driveway was empty. Church morning, everyone had left. Inside the house was quiet. Too quiet. Grant went upstairs. I walked toward the dining room. The table had been cleared. Napkins folded, plates gone. But the floor was empty. The box was gone. For a second I stood very still. Then I heard footsteps. Elaine stood in the doorway to the kitchen. She wasn't dressed for church. Her expression was neutral. You left something, she said. I didn't answer. She gestured toward the counter. There. The box sat on the granite surface, unopened, untouched. "Housekeeping found it," she added. I nodded once. "Thank you." She watched me for a long moment. "You're upset." "That's accurate." She crossed her arms. "You have to understand something," she said. "I've seen girls like you before." I lifted the box. "And what kind is that? The kind who see a good family and think it's a ladder?" Her voice was calm. "Certain. Grant is a good man," she continued. "He deserves someone who loves him, not his future." I met her eyes. "And you believe that isn't me?" "I believe time will tell." There was no hatred in her tone, just conviction. That almost made it worse. I placed the box back on the counter. "Mrs. Carter," I said quietly, "I didn't bring this to climb anything." She tilted her head. "Then what did you bring it for?" I looked at the box, then back at her. "For your family." She smiled slightly. "We'll see." Upstairs, Grant called my name. I picked up the box and walked toward the stairs. But as I reached the first step, something stopped me. I set the box back down, right there on the counter, and I left it. Grant carried our bags to the car. "Did you get the box?" he asked. I closed the trunk. "No." He frowned. "Why?" I started the engine. "Because sometimes," I said, "people have to open the door themselves." Grant looked back at the house, and for the first time since last night, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Inside that house, sitting quietly on the kitchen counter, was the best opportunity his family had seen in 10 years, and they still thought it was a cheap gift. The drive back to New York took almost 3 hours. Grant drove the first half. I watched the highway stretch forward in quiet lines of gray. Neither of us rushed the conversation. Sometimes the most honest relationships leave space between sentences. About 40 minutes in, Grant finally said it. "You knew she'd react like that." I didn't answer immediately. "I suspected," I said. "And you still brought the box?" "Yes." He glanced at me briefly. "That's brave. It's practical." He smiled faintly. "You see the world differently than my family." "I see supply chains," I replied. "That's not a metaphor." He laughed once under his breath. It was the first light moment since dinner. When we reached Manhattan, traffic slowed into the usual evening crawl. Grant parked outside my building in Queens. The elevated train rattled overhead. Same sound as always, comforting in its predictability. We carried our bags upstairs. My apartment felt smaller after his parents' house, but it also felt honest. No performance. No heavy furniture trying to prove a point. Grant set his bag down and leaned against the kitchen counter. "You left the proposal," he said. "Yes." "You're not worried they'll ignore it?" "No." Why? I poured water into 2 glasses and handed him one. "Because curiosity is stronger than pride," I said. "Eventually." He studied me. "You're very calm about this." "I've done my part." "And if they never open it," I shrugged slightly, "then they'll keep having supply problems." Grant nodded slowly. "You really did 3 months of work for them." "I did it for you," I corrected gently. He looked down at the glass in his hands. That landed where it needed to. The next week passed quietly. Work absorbed most of my attention. Ports were backed up on the West Coast. 2 shipments from Vancouver needed rerouting. My team spent a Tuesday night on calls with a manufacturer in Ohio. Normal chaos. Grant called his parents on Wednesday. I was sitting on the couch when he finished the call. "Well," I asked. He rubbed his forehead. They opened the box. I didn't look surprised. "What did your mom say?" At first she thought it was some kind of scrapbook. That made sense. The first page of the proposal wasn't numbers. It was context, a map, a network overview. Then came the sourcing plan, the pricing structure, the supplier introductions. Grant sat down beside me. She didn't realize what it was until Dad started reading. And he looked at me carefully. They thought it was fake. I nodded. That reaction was predictable. Did they recognize the supplier? Yes. And that's when things got quiet. Grant leaned forward, elbows on his knees. My dad asked where you got access. I waited. What did you tell him? I asked. That you're a director at the company. I didn't react. Grant watched me closely. I didn't know how else to answer, he said. That was honest. My mom thought I was exaggerating. I almost smiled. What changed her mind? Grant stood up and walked to the window. Dad called a contact, he said, at the supplier network. I could imagine the conversation perfectly. Careful tone, casual question, then recognition. Grant turned back toward me. The contact confirmed your name. Silence settled in the apartment. Mom didn't say anything for a long time, he added. I pictured Elaine standing in that polished kitchen. The box open, pages spread across the counter. A proposal she had laughed at 24 hours earlier. What did she say eventually? I asked. Grant hesitated. She asked why you didn't tell us who you were. There it was. The misunderstanding that always appears after the truth surfaces. Because that's not how respect works, I said quietly. Grant nodded slowly. They didn't call you. No, they feel embarrassed. That's normal. Grant studied me. You're not angry. I shook my head. Anger isn't useful here. What is time? 2 days later, Grant received another call from his father. This one lasted longer. When he hung up, he looked thoughtful. They've been contacting other suppliers, he said, trying to solve the problem without the proposal. That makes sense. None of them are offering terms like yours. I leaned back into the couch. That also makes sense. Grant watched me carefully. Are you trying to prove a point? What then? I met his eyes. I'm letting them see the difference between assumption and reality. He nodded. That afternoon I stayed late at the office. My assistant knocked lightly on the door near 6. There's a call for you, she said, from Pennsylvania. I knew before she said the name. Elaine Carter. I picked up the phone. Hello? Her voice was quieter than I remembered. Natalie. I didn't answer right away. I believe we owe you a conversation, she said. That phrasing was careful. Not apology, but movement. I'm listening, I said. She took a breath. We've reviewed your proposal. Yes, it's thorough. I almost smiled. That's my job. Another pause. You must understand something, she continued. My husband and I have seen many people approach our family with promises. I imagine you have, and some of them had motives. I imagine that too. Her voice softened slightly. When you arrived at our house, we assumed you were another. I know. Silence. Then she said something that surprised me. We were wrong about at least one thing. What's that you do earn? I leaned back in my chair. And the rest I asked. We're still learning. That honesty mattered more than a perfect apology. Before hanging up, she said one more sentence. We'd like to meet again. I looked at the skyline outside my office window, the city moving in its usual rhythm. We'll see, I said. After I hung up, I sat quietly for a minute. Not victorious, just thoughtful. Grant texted me later that evening. Mom wants another dinner, I typed back. That might be interesting, because somewhere in a quiet suburb in Pennsylvania, a family that had laughed at a cheap box was now realizing they had been holding the future of their company in their hands, and they had pushed it onto the floor. Elaine Carter did not apologize over the phone. That didn't surprise me. People like her rarely apologize in sentences. They apologize in posture, in tone, in the willingness to sit down again. Grant and I drove back to Pennsylvania the following Saturday. The same highway, the same long stretches of winter trees, but the air between us felt different. Quieter, not tense, just aware. Grant kept both hands on the wheel. You don't have to do this, he said after a while. I know. If you want to walk away from the deal, I'll support that. I'm not here for the deal, I replied. He glanced at me. Then why are we going? I watched the road ahead. Because relationships deserve a second conversation. He nodded slowly. The Carter house looked exactly the same when we arrived. Same stone walkway, same carefully trimmed hedges. But when Elaine opened the door this time, she didn't evaluate my coat. She simply stepped aside. "Thank you for coming," she said. Grant's father stood in the living room. Tom Carter was a practical man, broad shoulders, gray hair, the kind of presence that suggests decades of making decisions. He shook my hand. Firm, respectful. "Miss Carter," he said. "Natalie," I corrected gently. He nodded once. We sat at the dining table again, the same table where the box had hit the floor, but this time no extended family, just the four of us. Elaine placed the proposal folder in the center of the table, neatly organized, every page marked with small sticky notes. "We read everything she said. I'm sure you did." Tom leaned forward slightly. "You understand why we hesitated," he said. "Yes. Your proposal connects us to a supplier network we've avoided." "Why avoided scale?" he replied. "They usually work with larger contracts." "That's true." He studied me carefully. "You believe you can secure those terms?" "I know I can." There was no arrogance in my voice, just clarity. Tom nodded slowly. Grant watched the exchange like someone seeing two familiar worlds overlap. Elaine folded her hands. "I would like to address something she said." I waited. "When you came to dinner last week, I made assumptions." "Yes." She didn't look away. "I assumed you were interested in our family's resources. That's a common assumption. Is it wrong? It was in this case." Her mouth tightened slightly. "You never mentioned your position." "No one asked." Tom glanced at Elaine briefly. She understood the point. Grant spoke quietly beside me. "Natalie doesn't talk about money much." Elaine gave him a small look. "That is unusual in New York." Maybe I said, but competence doesn't require announcements. Tom turned a page of the proposal. "You've structured this as a phased partnership." "Yes. Low risk in the first quarter. That's intentional. Then expansion if the supply stabilizes." "Correct." He closed the folder. "You've thought through our weaknesses." I nodded. "That's what good partnerships do." Silence settled over the table. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Elaine finally spoke again. When I pushed that box off the table, she said slowly, "I believed I was protecting my son." Grant shifted slightly in his chair. "I know," I said, "but protection built on misjudgment can cause harm." She accepted that without arguing. "I've spent my life watching people attach themselves to successful families," she said. "I understand. Some marriages begin as business transactions. That's true." She looked at me carefully. "You approached ours as a business opportunity." I smiled faintly. "That's not the same thing." Grant looked between us. "What's the difference?" he asked. I answered simply. "A transaction extracts value. A partnership builds it." Tom leaned back in his chair. "That's a useful distinction." Elaine's voice softened slightly. "I misjudged your intention." "That happens." She hesitated. "I also misjudged your capacity." "That happens too." Grant watched me closely. He understood something was shifting. Not dominance, not victory, respect. Tom tapped the folder lightly. "This proposal could stabilize our supply chain for the next 5 years." "Yes. Why offer it to us?" "That question mattered," I answered honestly. "Because Grant told me you were struggling." Grant's father glanced at him. Grant shrugged slightly. I mentioned it once. Tom looked back at me. "And you spent 3 months solving it?" "Yes." Elaine studied my face. "You did that before we'd even met?" "Yes." Why I met her eyes. "Because that's how I take care of people I care about." The room went quiet again. Tom cleared his throat. You realize he said that after last week we would understand if you withdrew this offer. I considered it. Grant looked at me. What made you reconsider, he asked. I thought about the box on the floor, about the silence around the table, about the phone call. Because respect can be learned, I said, and businesses survive on second chances. Elaine exhaled slowly. That's more generous than we deserve? Perhaps. Tom slid the proposal back toward me. We would like to move forward. I rested my hands lightly on the folder, on one condition. 3 faces looked up. Grant first, then his parents. This partnership will be professional, I said calmly. Not familial. Tom nodded immediately. That's reasonable. Elaine hesitated. Then she nodded too. Grant reached under the table and squeezed my hand once. Not triumph. Recognition. The conversation shifted after that. Timelines, logistics, pilot shipment quantities, practical things. But beneath the business language, something quieter was happening. The Carter family was learning something they had never needed to learn before. Competence doesn't always arrive wearing wealth. Sometimes it arrives in a plain box and waits patiently for someone to open it. The meeting ended without a handshake ceremony, no dramatic conclusion, just quiet agreement. Tom walked me to the front door while Grant gathered our coats. Elaine stayed at the table reviewing the proposal one more time. Tom paused before opening the door. I've spent 30 years building this company, he said. I can usually tell when someone is exaggerating. He looked directly at me. You weren't. Thank you. That makes this situation unusual. In what way, he considered the question. My wife and I misjudged you. That happens. But it rarely happens this publicly, he said. I didn't argue. Grant joined us at the door. The 3 of us stepped outside. Cold air again. But it felt different this time. Tom extended his hand. This time it wasn't polite formality. It was professional respect. We'll have our legal team review the framework Monday, he said. Of course. Grant opened the car door for me. Tom turned back toward the house. Then he said something unexpected. You handled yourself well in there. I nodded. That's part of my job. The drive back to New York felt lighter. Grant tapped the steering wheel quietly while we drove. You didn't have to give them that second chance, he said. I know. You did it anyway. Yes. Why? I looked out the window. Because revenge is easy. But respect is harder. Because your father listened, I said. Grant nodded slowly. And my mom? She's still processing. Grant laughed softly. That's generous. She's not cruel, I said. She's cautious. Grant was quiet for a while after that. Then he said something that mattered. You didn't try to humiliate them. That wouldn't solve anything. Some people would have. Yes, but that's not leadership. He glanced at me. I forget sometimes what you actually do. Most people do. When we reached Queens, the train roared overhead again. The same metal rhythm as always. Grant parked outside my building. You know something, he said. What I never asked you how much you make. I smiled faintly. That's true. And now I know it's a lot. It's enough. He nodded. That's a good answer. Inside the apartment, the night felt calm. We made tea, sat on the couch, no television, just quiet. Grant leaned back. I need to talk to my mom, he said. About what? About how she sees people. That's a long conversation. I know. He stood up. I'll call her tomorrow. The next afternoon he did. I was in the kitchen reviewing shipment schedules when I heard his voice in the living room. Firm, not angry, but clear. You can't talk to her like that again. Pause. No, Mom, I mean it. Another pause. I don't care what you assumed. Silence. Then his voice softened slightly. Yes, I know. A longer pause. When he came into the kitchen later, he looked thoughtful. "What happened?" I asked. He leaned against the counter. "Mom said something I didn't expect. What she said, she wasn't afraid of you marrying for money." "Then what was she afraid of?" He met my eyes. "She was afraid you'd be smarter than us." I blinked once. "That's honest." Grant nodded. "She grew up watching people lose everything because they trusted the wrong partner. I understand that fear. She thought she was protecting me. And now," he sighed, "now she realizes she was protecting an illusion." That evening, Elaine called me directly. I answered. "Natalie," she said. "Yes. I've been thinking about our conversation." "I imagine you have." There was a quiet pause. "I would like to say something plainly," she said. "I'm listening. When you walked into our home last week, I judged you by appearance." "Yes. That was lazy." The word surprised me. "I appreciate the honesty," she continued. "I spent years believing successful families must guard themselves. That's understandable. But I forgot something. What competence doesn't always look impressive." I almost smiled. "That's true." She took a breath. "You showed more restraint at that dinner than I did. I've had practice. With people like me, with systems that underestimate you." She was quiet. Then she said, "You left that box on the counter on purpose." "Yes." "Why?" "So you could choose to open it." She exhaled slowly. That was humbling. Before we ended the call, she said something else. "Tom and I visited 3 suppliers this week." I waited. "They all treated us the way I treated you." There it was. Experience. "Sometimes perspective arrives quickly," I said. "Yes," she replied, "and sometimes it arrives too late." The partnership contract moved forward over the next few weeks. Meetings, numbers, shipment schedules, professional work. But something else shifted quietly alongside it. Elaine's tone changed. Less guarded, more curious. Grant noticed it too. One evening he said, "My mom asked what books you read." "That's progress." He smiled. "She's trying." And I realized something important. The Carter family didn't just learn about supply chains. They learned something harder. Respect isn't inherited, it's practiced, one conversation at a time. The first shipment arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. 3 containers of alloy components unloaded at a warehouse in Pennsylvania. Tom called me that afternoon. Not about the contract, about the timing. "Exactly when you said," he told me. "That's the idea." He laughed quietly. "I've been in manufacturing 30 years. Timing like this still surprises me. Good systems look boring," I said, "until they fail." He agreed with that. Over the next few weeks, the Carter Company stabilized. Nothing dramatic, just steady improvement. Material shortages eased. Production schedules returned to normal. The business that had been wobbling slowly found its balance again. But the most interesting changes weren't happening in warehouses. They were happening in conversations. Elaine started calling occasionally. At first, the calls were practical. Questions about supply contracts, shipping windows, pricing volatility. But gradually the topics widened. One evening she asked, "Why do you live in Queens?" I smiled. "Because it's practical. You could afford something else." "Yes, but you choose not to." "I choose efficiency." She laughed softly. "That word comes up a lot when you speak. Efficiency is underrated." There was a pause. Then she said something that surprised me. "You remind me of my father." "Oh, he ran a small machine shop," she said. "Never wasted anything. Not time, not money." "That sounds familiar." "He would have liked you." That sentence carried weight. It wasn't an apology, but it was a bridge. Grant noticed the difference too. We were walking through Central Park one afternoon when he said, "You know, my mom asked me for your company's annual report." "That's unexpected." She said, "If she's going to work with you, she wants to understand how you think." "That's fair." Grant shook his head slightly. She's never done that with anyone before. People change, I said. Slowly. Spring arrived in New York. The trees along the park paths turned green. Grant and I started planning the wedding again. Quiet conversations, guest lists, nothing extravagant. One evening we drove back to Pennsylvania for dinner. The Carter house looked the same as always, but the feeling inside was different. Elaine greeted us at the door. This time she hugged me first. A brief, careful hug, but genuine. Dinner was simpler than the first one, just the four of us again. Tom grilled salmon. Grant poured wine. No extended audience, no performance. Halfway through the meal, Elaine set something on the table. The same box, the one that had fallen to the floor months earlier. She slid it toward me. I kept it, she said. I noticed. I wanted to return it properly. I opened the lid. Inside were the original proposal papers, carefully organized, untouched. I thought you'd keep them, I said. No, she replied. They belong to you. I looked at her. Why return them now? She folded her hands. Because the partnership exists without them. That was true. The contracts had been finalized weeks ago. Tom leaned back in his chair. The proposal started the conversation, he said, but trust finished it. Elaine nodded. And trust doesn't belong in a box. I closed the lid slowly. The room was quiet. Grant looked between us. Then he said something that had probably been building in his mind for months. Mom. She looked at him. You know Natalie never cared about our money. I know that now, and you know she makes more than I do. Elaine smiled faintly. Yes. Grant looked at me. You never used that fact. I shrugged slightly. It wasn't relevant. Tom chuckled. That's the most impressive part. Elaine leaned forward slightly. There's something I want to say, she said. Not to Grant. To me. When I first met you, she began, I saw a young woman who might benefit from our family. She paused. I didn't imagine we might benefit from you. I held her gaze. That happens sometimes. She nodded. But there's something else. What's that you didn't punish us? Grant looked curious. You had every opportunity. That's not leadership, I said. It's revenge. Elaine looked down briefly, then back at me. I think I understand the difference now. After dinner, we moved to the living room. The conversation drifted to lighter things, travel, books, Grant's childhood stories. At one point, Elaine laughed and said, You know what, I told my sister last week what Grant asked, that my future daughter-in-law rescued our supply chain. I raised an eyebrow. That's a dramatic version. Families enjoy dramatic versions. Grant squeezed my hand quietly. Later, when we walked out to the car, the night air felt warm. Spring finally settling in. Grant opened the door for me. You know what tonight was, he said. What peace. I thought about that word. About the box. About the dinner months earlier. About the laughter that had once filled that dining room. Yes, I said, it was. But peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of understanding. And understanding, I had learned, arrives slowly. Sometimes through humiliation, sometimes through humility, and sometimes through something as simple as opening a box you once pushed onto the floor. The wedding was small. That was Grant's idea. And mine. After everything that had happened, neither of us wanted a ballroom or 100 distant relatives pretending to know our story. We chose a quiet church in Pennsylvania. The same one Grant's family had attended for years. White walls, wooden pews worn smooth by decades of Sundays. A place where voices naturally lowered, where people listened more than they performed. Elaine arrived early. I saw her through the window as I waited in the small room behind the sanctuary. She stood near the entrance, speaking quietly with the pastor. Her posture had changed over the past few months. Less rigid, more thoughtful. Grant's father was beside her. Tom had always been respectful. But now there was something else in the way he greeted me. Not politeness, partnership. Grant stepped into the room a few minutes later. He was already dressed. Suit simple, tie slightly crooked. "You ready?" he asked. "I think so." He smiled. "You always say that before solving complicated problems. That's because certainty is overrated." He laughed softly. Outside the room, guests began to gather. Not many. A few friends from New York, some of Grant's extended family. My parents had flown in from Ohio. They were still amazed by the life I had built, but they never treated it like a trophy, just a continuation of the values they raised me with. Practicality, consistency, respect. The ceremony itself was quiet. No dramatic music. Just the soft murmur of voices and the steady cadence of the pastor's words. Grant held my hands during the vows. His grip was warm, steady. When he said, "I promise to stand beside you," I believed him, because I had already seen him do it. After the ceremony, we held a small reception in the church hall. Long tables, simple food, nothing extravagant. At one point, Elaine approached me while I was speaking with my mother. She waited politely until the conversation ended. "Natalie," she said. "Yes, I have something for you." She handed me a small wrapped package. No ribbon, just plain brown paper. It reminded me of something. I opened it slowly. Inside was a framed photograph, the dining room table from that first dinner. But the photograph had been taken recently, the same table, the same chairs. But now the proposal folder sat in the center, opened, reviewed, used. Elaine watched my reaction carefully. "I thought it was fitting," she said. "It is." She hesitated. "There's something else I want to say." I waited. When that box fell to the floor, she said quietly, "I thought I understood the world." She looked down briefly. "I thought success had a specific appearance." And now she met my eyes. "Now I know it sometimes arrives in plain packaging." I smiled faintly. "That's a useful lesson." Elaine nodded. Then she surprised me again. "I've told that story 3 times already." "To who, my friends? And what do you tell them, that I almost pushed away the most capable partner our family ever met?" I laughed softly. "That's one version. It's the honest one." Across the room, Grant was speaking with Tom near the window, both of them laughing about something. When Grant saw us talking, he walked over. "Everything okay?" he asked. Elaine smiled at him. "Everything is better than okay." Grant looked between us. Suspicious. What did I miss? Elaine gestured to the photograph in my hands. "Just a reminder." Grant studied it. Then he shook his head and laughed. "That's actually perfect." Later that evening, as the reception ended, and the last guests began to leave, the church hall grew quiet. Grant and I stepped outside into the warm air. The sky was fading into soft evening blue. We stood on the steps together. "You know something," Grant said. "What if my mom hadn't pushed that box onto the floor? None of this would have happened." He nodded. "I guess mistakes can start good stories." "Yes," I said, "they can." I thought about the journey that had started with a moment of humiliation, the assumptions, the silence, the slow realization. Respect isn't automatic. It's learned, tested, sometimes painfully. But when people are willing to face their mistakes, something unexpected can happen. They grow. And growth in families and in business is what keeps things alive. If there's one thing I've learned from this story, it's this: never assume you understand someone's worth based on what you see. Some of the most valuable things in life arrive quietly, without labels, without announcements. Sometimes they arrive in a simple box that people are too quick to push away. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to reflect on the assumptions we all make. And if you enjoyed listening, consider sharing it with someone who might need the reminder, because respect, like opportunity, should never be judged by the packaging.